Hi, welcome to 2020 Tasty Treats with GourmetQuilter. We're having a bit of fun this year with 20 different programs going, or 21 program, 20 different items happening throughout the year. Each one goes for 20 days, where there'll be 20 days of downloadable pattern and video for each portion of the treat. So what we're doing at the moment is some 20 foundation piece blocks. We've been doing these for a little while now, so for some of you, you'll know that. You can have a look at more information on GourmetQuilter.com. And these are the blocks we've done so far. We've actually done 19 blocks, so we're on the very last block today. So we're doing really well. So we've managed to do all these. Most of these blocks have several segments. Some have only 2 segments. Some have up to 7 or something ridiculous like that. But we've got there. We're doing really well. This is their last block, this friendly looking little puppy here. And guess what? He is actually all done in one only segment. How amazing is that? There's quite a few little pieces in there. And if you've already registered with GourmetQuilter to receive the pattern, you'll have something that you can print with the pattern on it, with the fabric information. And I'm just going to go ahead now and start showing you how to piece him. So we start, funnily enough, we start with his nose. So I've got my dark piece here for his nose. And so I'm just going to position that just initially with a little dab of glue, just to hold it in place. Any glue will do if it's in a little glue stick like that. You don't want a heavy glue, you don't want too much glue. You want the wrong side of the fabric to the wrong side of the paper. This is the right side with the printing, and this is the right side of the fabric. This is the side we're going to see, so everything is mirror imaged as we do the foundation piecing, and we're stitching through the paper with the fabric pieces. So to create the slightly rounded look of the nose, we're going to put some tiny little pieces around that to just build it out so that instead of a big square, it's going to be more rounded like a nose. So we've got piece 1 is the nose itself, and then piece 2 is a tiny little triangle. So we just do that by stitching a very small piece on. So the best way I found to position the fabrics is to fold over the paper pattern along the line we're about to stitch. Now it's only a very small line, and we want to put this right sides together and position it so that the fold line gives you enough of a seam allowance sitting beyond there. And then you can let that go back and we can come and stitch that little line. So we're stitching just into the other areas beyond the actual line on the pattern so that it's within a seam allowance of the next part. So I'm just going, it's only a short little seam, I'm just going to stitch that. So I'm using a smaller than usual stitch length. Normally it's 2.5 on this machine. I've set it to 1.5, so it's a bit shorter. So it makes it nice and strong, and it also means that it's perforated the paper more frequently so that we can tear the paper away later on. So I've gone ahead, I've stitched my little short line in. I'm going to fold the paper back along that stitching line, and I'm just going to trim that off to give me a more reasonable amount for a seam allowance. And now I'm going to bring the iron, and I'm just going to press that little bit of seam that we've just done. I find pressing as we go makes all the difference. So that's piece 2, then piece 3 is exactly the same on the opposite side there. So it's just a matter of building out just slowly. There's no need to rush with this. We want right sides together, position it so that our seam allowance looks about right, and we can come back and we can stitch that next part. So these are very tiny pieces when they're finished. Not so tiny at this stage, which is quite good. We can work with something much more manageable. Same thing, we're going to fold that back. I'm going to trim that seam allowance. I'm going to press it. So I press every time. It definitely makes all the difference, especially with these tiny reed pieces, that they can just come out correctly. So we've done piece 1, 2 and 3. Now this is a slightly larger triangle now, but we don't really need any larger pieces for it, although we might use this one just to make sure. So now we're going to sew it on an angle because we want that to sit up there. So just the same, I'm going to fold along that stitching line, I need to make sure that this whole area, it's only little, I know, is covered with fabric, and it will be because we know that we've got a big enough piece here. And I'm just going to stitch that on. Now I could stitch it at an angle, it really doesn't matter as long as there's enough fabric behind, because the pieces are so small that the grain of the fabric doesn't really make, it doesn't really have much of an impact in that sense. So I'm just going to stitch along that little line there, just going a little bit beyond the line each time. So that's all looking pretty good. It always looks a little bit misshapen for a little while until it all comes together. Trim off my excess there. Press that piece out. And then we've got to do piece 5, which is exactly the same in the opposite direction. Whoops. Trying to fold it back to front. Bad enough working back to front. And I'm going to place my piece behind again. I know it's big enough. And I'm just going to stitch along there. So really it's just a matter of building out like this with something that's as fiddly as this. But if you just take your time, you don't need to rush, the dog will wait for you. Dogs are very patient. And where I may have some stitching that I've already done into that area, I can just pull that away from the paper and trim my seam allowance and press. I just thought if I showed you all this fiddly little nose bit, then the rest of it I'm sure you can do, because we've been doing so much over the last 20 days. So we've done 5 now. So piece 6 is just a little slither along here, and 7 and 8. So I'll go ahead and put piece 6 on so that we can have a look at and see how that's going. Just the same, we might want to do a little press fold again on the stitching line, position our piece behind so there's enough seam there, and stitch on that little line there. So I'm going to trim that up, just as we've been doing, fold back on the stitched line, trim the seam, and press it. I think you've got the hang of that now, so I've got another, I've got piece 7 and piece 8 to do like that, and then piece 9 is just a little triangle of the background fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and do all those bits because it's just the same as we've been doing, and that'll just build a shape of our nose nicely, and then we put his face on afterwards. So I've gone ahead finishing surrounding my nose. It's quite a lot of work for a nose. It's a good thing dogs have good noses, isn't it? And I've put my little piece of background underneath his little chin there, and or nose or whatever that bit is. And now I need to put my, so that was piece 9, so I need to put piece 10 on now. So that's actually the dog's face. So I'm going to fold that along the stitch line so that I can position it onto the piece of fabric, because I need it to flip back on the piece of fabric like that. So I'm going to position it there, because this bit here is the bit we're trying to cover. So I've got to make sure that that's fairly central in there, and I can do that, and it's plenty long enough. I've got a huge piece of fabric there, so that when I stitch that on across there, this is going to flip back up there. So I'm going to stitch right across this line here now, and he will have a face but no features. So I'll just trim this seam, and then we can press that up. So just pulling away any stitching that we've done in that little area there, so I can fold the paper back along that seam line, trim the seam, oops, and I'm going to press that so that then you can see how that nose has gone in there nicely. So he's got what appears at a glance to be a fairly round nose. I don't know if dogs' noses are actually round, but this one's looking pretty good. So now we need to put on piece number 11. So we've just got some thin slithers here. If we look at this block up here, we can see that he's got a gap between his ears. So it's those little slithers that we're going to do next of the background fabric. So I've got my pieces already here. So what I'm going to do is fold again so that I can see where I'm going to sew to position my fabric. So if I hold that against the ruler, I can fold that up. And so I can fold that over, and I know that I'll need to fit it between this area and this area. So my piece of fabric can sit there. Oops. And I can position that on there. I can double check that I've got that far enough because I can see it on this side, and I have. So now I can stitch that line there, and that piece of fabric is going to flip over to form that little bit between his ears. We all have things between our ears. So that's looking pretty good. I'm just going to trim that up. This is a great long piece of fabric. I didn't need that much. And then I can press that. Oops, my fabric got caught a little bit there. It's going to be okay. It's within the seam allowance area, so that's fine. It will get trimmed off. And then the pattern suggests that you do the narrow piece on the other side next, but I'm going to go ahead and put the other ear on so that you can just see how that's done, and then I can do that side afterwards. So I'm coming back here again, and I'm folding again on that next line that I need to sew on. It's not far away from the last line, but it is a distance. You can position the ear. So it's going up higher this time. It's coming all the way up to here and there, so that's looking pretty good. I've got plenty of width of fabric, so I know it's going to fit. So now I just need to stitch up this line, and that'll pop his ear on. Keep trimming away all this excess fabric as we go, and I'll just press that as well. So you can see he's starting to get a little gap between his ear and his face, and so I'm going to go ahead and put the other side on, and then I'll come back and show you the next stage. So I've been quite busy working away on a little dog here. He's coming up really nicely, and I'm pretty much haven't done anything that you haven't seen. I've just gone and done the next stage, which I'm about to show you again, because he's on both sides. So I had gone ahead, I put the ears and things on. I put the little piece A15 at the top. It's a little piece of the background above his head there. And then I put these two side pieces on this side to create the ear. So I'm just going to do the same thing on this side so that you can see how all that worked. So I've got my strip here that goes on next. So I have put a fold in my pattern along that line that where I'm going to sew. I know that my fabric's wide enough to cover this width of fabric that I've flipped the pattern back for, and I'm just going to position that on there. It doesn't need to go all the way to the bottom there, but it does need to be covered at the top up here. So there's plenty there. And I might just go ahead now and I'll stitch that and then trim that back and show you how that looks. And then we'll put the last piece on. So it's quite interesting just working with one segment, because we started in the middle more or less in the nose and building out and out and out. So that's been a a bit of a different exercise because I think that's the only block that we've done that's only been one segment. We've done some 2-segment blocks. So I'm just flipping that back so I can trim all that excess away. Give myself a nice little seam allowance there. And I'm going to press that. So you can see his ear is appearing there. We just need to do the last bit and then trim the block up. So now in the corners here, these are just some large triangles, so I cut a larger square and cut them in half so that I've got a piece more or less the right size. It will still need trimming down. So the same thing, I'm going to do a fold along my stitching line where I'm going to be stitching it, and I can then position that onto my triangle, and I just need to make sure that this piece of the pattern here that I've folded over is covered by the fabric underneath, and there's plenty of fabric there, so it's looking pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that. And then we can have a look at that and trim the block up, and we will have one little dog. So it seems a little bit fiddly with all these extra bits of fabric around. You could probably have used smaller pieces than I have, however I'm quite happy to just trim those off as I go. Now I can press that. And now he's looking way more like a little dog with 2 ears and a nose. So now I just need to trim around the outside of the block, so along that dotted line. Okay, so that's our little dog block. So this is our final block for this series. However, he is missing some eyes, I feel. This one here, I've managed to do some eyes. Now I've just done them with a permanent marking pen. You might prefer to use some buttons perhaps, or some such thing as that. Whatever it is that you like to do for eyes, I like to use pens. So there are some eyes shown on the pattern. They're not particularly marked otherwise because everyone likes to do things a little bit differently. So I'm just going to pop a couple of pins in where I think I want my eyes to go. And these are quite elongated head pins, but somewhere like that. So I've got a pin mark now where I'm going to start drawing those eyes. So I'm just going to use this marking pen here, and I just start off with a small eye on each side. It's probably fairly important to try and keep them level, and you can just build them up if you want to make them a little bit larger like I have. So you start small and build them larger, and just keep an eye on that they're staying level with each other. Now he might have eyelashes. I don't know whether dogs like to have eyelashes on them or not. You might know. I don't have a dog. But that's looking pretty good. He can see where he's going now. So that was our final block for the foundation blocks. So I'll pop it up here so that we can have a look at all these blocks together. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I've enjoyed doing them. And I might pop a little pin there to hold that little bee down because he's getting very excited and wants to fly away. So that's all 20 of our blocks now, all done. So this is the last video in this series, the last pattern in this series. So thank you so much for being with me throughout this series. We do have other things happening throughout 2020 through the website GourmetQuilter.com, so please do go and have a look. Other than that, please enjoy them. Remember, when you pull the papers out, they can tear against the seam line that we've stitched quite well. You may want to use some water. I've got a water spritzer here, so just a little spray bottle of some sort just to spray water. Not too much water, but it just softens the paper. So if you've got some fiddly bits in the corners, you'll be able to pull them out quite easily. Like that way, maybe some tweezers or a little pin to help pull some of those tight bits out. And I just remind you that not all the edges will be on the straight grain. So your blocks, once those papers have come away, could be just slightly unstable, so just be aware of that when you go to piece them in to something else. Other than that, that's it for this series of foundation piece blocks. Please enjoy them, and I will look forward to seeing you doing something else. Thank you.